As the executive director said earlier, the Greenway Trail proposal would require the removal of the tracks for it to be constructed because the corridor's right-of-way is not wide enough for both the Greenway Trail and the railroad tracks. The railroad tracks, however, cannot be removed as long as there is a freight easement. The only way to remove the freight easement is to abandon it, either voluntarily by the owner or through adverse abandonment. The Surface Transportation Board, as I said, must approve any application to abandon it. So in the end, the Greenway Trail requires the removal of the railroad tracks, and this cannot occur without the abandonment of the freight easement. And I think it is extremely doubtful that the SDP would approve an adverse abandonment application. However, unfortunately, from my perspective, Greenway advocates make a number of misleading arguments that only confuse the issue. They argue, for one, that the RTC only wants to remove the freight easement because the cost of repairing the tracks for freight is expensive, and it's not about the kind of passenger service Camp provides. This is true, but ignores the fact that by removing the tracks, no train service will be possible. Greenway advocates also argue that abandonment does not require removal of the tracks. This is probably, from my perspective, the most disingenuous argument, since while it is legally true, it doesn't admit the fact that without abandonment, there can be no Greenway. Greenway advocates argue that even if the tracks are removed, they can be put back if funding for rail service becomes feasible. How likely is that, especially should the Greenway initiative pass? Greenway advocates argue that rail banking requires that the rail corridor be preserved. This only means that the right-of-way can't be sold off. With rail banking, the tracks can be ripped up. The Greenway initiative has now qualified for the ballot and will be voted on in June. It's related to the abandonment issue because the supporters of the initiative have made and will continue to make the argument that the initiative would not prevent rail service from returning to the corridor, even if the Greenway Trail is built. Is it realistic to think that public transit would ever return if the initiative passes, since it adopts the trail as county policy and all but eliminates references to rail in the county general plan? Despite the misleading rhetoric, if the freight easement is abandoned, Greenway supporters will undoubtedly advocate that the rail tracks be removed, and if they succeed, the likelihood of rail service ever returning between Santa Cruz and Watsonville is 0 to none. Based on all this, I do not support the adverse abandonment of freight easement. And if we could vote on it today, I would be voting no. Finally, in a fundamental way, this whole debate, as some speakers have said at the commission, seems like an exercise in futility. Among the over 6,000 emails I've received opposing abandonment was a letter from the San Lorenzo Fire District opposing abandonment based on the potential need of an operable rail line during a natural emergency, like a devastating wildfire. There has also been email and testimony from private companies indicating that they would use the line to move their products if the line was in operation. Given these and the strong opposition from Growing Camp, I think it is extremely doubtful that the SDP would approve an adverse abandonment application.